Take the scraps? My brother mocked. Then their $80 million buyout collapsed. My stepmother and half-brother actually laughed out loud when their lawyer handed me the paperwork pushing me out of my father's multi-million-dollar estate. They thought they had just flawlessly secured the family mansion, the investment portfolios, and the entirety of my father's corporate empire, blissfully unaware that the only asset with any real value was the tiny, forgotten shell company my father had secretly transferred to my name 3 years ago. But to understand how they walked so willingly into their own destruction, you have to understand the architecture of our family. My name is Arthur Vance. I am 34 years old, an industrial systems engineer, and for most of my life, I was the ghost haunting the halls of my own home. My father, Richard, was a man built of concrete and ledger paper. He founded Apex Manufacturing in the late 80s, turning a small machine shop in Chicago into a regional powerhouse. My mother died when I was 6. 2 years later, my father married Evelyn. A year after that, my half-brother Derek was born. From the moment Derek took his first breath, the hierarchy of the household was set in stone. Derek was the future. I was the leftover. Evelyn was never overtly abusive. Her cruelty was corporate, calculated, and quiet. She simply erased me. Family portraits on the sweeping staircase magically only featured the 3 of them. When I won the state science fair, she forgot to tell my father the date. When Derek managed a C- in basic algebra, he got a new sports car because he showed potential. You learn a lot about your worth by observing what people are willing to celebrate. I survived by making myself useful and invisible. I went to engineering school paid for by scholarships and loans, while Derek went to a private university on my father's dime, majoring in networking and partying. When I graduated, I went to work in the back end of Apex Manufacturing. I didn't get an office with a view. I got a desk in the server room. But while Derek was given a vice president title and spent his days taking clients out for expensive lunches on the company card, I learned how the engine actually ran. I developed the proprietary automated routing software that cut Apex's production costs by 40%. It was the lifeblood of the company, the only reason we were crushing our competitors. My father noticed. He never said, "I love you," and he never stood up to Evelyn, but he understood the math. He saw Derek leveraging company credit to fund a lavish lifestyle. He saw Evelyn quietly mortgaging the family estate to buy vacation homes in Aspen and Miami. My father was failing in health, trapped in a house with a wife and son who were waiting for him to die so they could cash out. 3 years before he passed, my father called me into his private study. He looked incredibly old that night, his breath rattling in his chest. He handed me a single manila folder. Inside were the incorporation papers for a small, anonymous LLC called Sentinel Consulting. "They're going to crash the ship, Artie," he said, his voice raspy. "Derek thinks business is just shaking hands. He's drowning the company in high-yield debt. Evelyn is bleeding my personal accounts. When I'm gone, they're going to try to take everything." He tapped the folder. "Apex owns the factories, the trucks, the payroll. But as of this morning, Sentinel Consulting owns the patents to your routing software, the exclusive licensing rights to our manufacturing process, and the trademark to the Apex name. I've transferred total ownership of Sentinel to you." I stared at the papers, stunned. If Derek doesn't own the software, then Apex is just a bunch of empty warehouses. My father finished, a bitter, sad smile touching his lips. "I'm leaving the shell to them. I'm leaving the core to you." When my father finally passed away from a massive coronary, the grief I felt was complicated. I mourned the relationship we never had time to fix, but I didn't have the luxury of grieving for long. Barely a week after the funeral, I was summoned to the mahogany-lined office of Evelyn's high-priced probate attorney, a shark named Harrison Sterling. Evelyn sat at the conference table, wearing a tailored black dress, looking less like a widow and more like a CEO ready for a hostile takeover. Derek slouched next to her, checking his expensive watch, looking profoundly bored. Sterling didn't waste time. "Arthur, we're here to discuss a pragmatic solution. Your father's estate is vast and complex. Probate could take years and drain millions in legal fees." He slid a thick stack of papers across the table. "Your stepmother and brother are offering a clean break. If you sign a waiver relinquishing any and all claims to the primary estate, the mansion, the investment accounts, and Apex Manufacturing, they are willing to concede ownership of a minor subsidiary your father set up a few years ago. Sentinel Consulting. It has no employees and negligible liquid assets, but it's yours free and clear. A gesture of goodwill. I looked down at the documents. It was a masterclass in legal bullying. They thought Sentinel was just a worthless tax shelter. They wanted me to sign away my rights so they wouldn't have to share a dime of the real money. Derek leaned forward, a smug grin spreading across his face. Look, Artie, let's be real. You don't know how to run a company like Apex. You're a tech guy. Take the little consulting firm. Go build websites or whatever. Sign the paper, and you can walk out of here today without a legal fight you can't afford to win. Evelyn offered a thin, sympathetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. We just want what's best for the family, Arthur. Your father would have wanted peace. I let the silence hang in the air. I let my shoulders slump. I manufactured a look of deep, resigned defeat. I picked up the heavy Montblanc pen Sterling offered me. If I sign this, we're done? I asked quietly. You won't come after me for anything else? Complete severance, Sterling confirmed smoothly. I signed my name on the dotted line. Derek actually chuckled out loud. Evelyn's posture immediately relaxed, a triumphant gleam in her eyes. Good luck, Arthur, she said coldly. It wasn't a wish. It was a dismissal. I was officially out of their lives. Over the next 8 months, I watched from a distance as they threw a party on the deck of the Titanic. Derek promoted himself to CEO of Apex. He bought a new fleet of company cars, expanded into 3 new states without doing any market research, and took out massive, predatory loans using the company's remaining equity as collateral. Evelyn completely renovated the Chicago mansion and threw lavish galas. They were living like billionaires on a credit card that was about to max out. Meanwhile, I quietly operated Sentinel Consulting from a small rented office. I kept the servers running. I optimized the code, and I waited. The collapse happened faster than even I anticipated. Apex's aggressive expansion failed spectacularly. The new factories couldn't produce without the automated routing software, which I had quietly geofenced and locked down to only operate within the original Chicago facilities. Production ground to a halt. Supply chains broke. The high-interest loans came due. Panic set in. Derek, desperate to save his own skin and fund Evelyn's lifestyle, brokered a deal to sell Apex Manufacturing to a ruthless private equity firm in New York for $80 million. It was a fire sale, but it was enough to clear the massive debts they had accumulated and leave them with a few million to spare. That's when I got the phone call. It was Derek. His voice was tight, high-pitched with barely concealed panic. Artie, hey man, look, we're closing the sale of Apex tomorrow. The buyer's lawyers are doing some final due diligence and they hit a weird administrative snag. Something about the licensing rights for the automation software. They need a signature from Sentinel Consulting to clear the transfer. Can you come down to the Apex boardroom tomorrow at 9? It'll take 5 minutes. Sure, Derek, I said, my voice perfectly level. I'll be there. The next morning, the Apex boardroom was suffocatingly tense. Evelyn was there, gripping her designer handbag like a life preserver. Derek looked like he hadn't slept in a week, sweating through his custom suit. Sterling, their lawyer, was pacing. On the other side of the massive glass table sat 3 cold-eyed attorneys representing the private equity firm. When I walked in, Derek let out a forced sigh of relief. Great, you're here. Sterling, give him the release form so we can wrap this up. Sterling slid a single piece of paper toward me. Arthur, this is a standard IP transfer authorization. It essentially states that Sentinel Consulting surrenders all proprietary software rights to Apex, allowing the sale to proceed. I didn't even look at the paper. I kept my hands in my pockets and looked directly at the lead attorney for the private equity firm. Gentlemen, have you reviewed the current financial state of Apex Manufacturing? The lead attorney frowned. We have. The company is carrying approximately $62 million in debt. We are acquiring it for $80 million. Assuming the debt and the operational assets. And what happens if Apex doesn't own the operational assets? I asked. Derek slammed his hand on the table. Artie, shut up and sign the damn paper. You don't know what you're talking about. I ignored him, reaching into my jacket and pulling out a certified financial and legal dossier. I placed it on the table and pushed it toward the New York attorneys. 3 years ago, Richard Vance transferred the exclusive patents, the source code, and the corporate trademarks of Apex into Sentinel Consulting. I said, my voice echoing in the dead quiet of the room. Apex Manufacturing does not own the software that makes its factories run. It does not own the process. Currently leases them from Sentinel. A lease that, according to Section 4 of my contract, was terminated upon the death of the founder. The lead attorney opened the dossier. His eyes scanned the certified documents. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. What is he talking about? Evelyn snapped, her composure cracking. Sterling, what is he talking about? Sterling snatched a copy of the documents. I watched his eyes dart back and forth across the page. I watched the color drain completely out of his face. He looked up at Derek, his mouth open, but no words came out. He was looking at a ghost. He was looking at the realization of his own catastrophic malpractice. He's right, Sterling whispered. The words sounded like a death sentence. Sentinel owns the IP. Apex is just empty buildings and debt. The New York attorney closed the folder and stood up. He looked at Derek with absolute disgust. You tried to sell us a company that doesn't own its own product. This constitutes massive financial fraud. The acquisition is dead. We are walking away, and we will be notifying the SEC. The three lawyers packed their briefcases and walked out. The heavy wooden door clicked shut behind them. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. Derek stared at the space where the buyers had been sitting. His chest was heaving. No, he muttered. No, no, no. The loans. The bank is going to call in the loans. $62 million, I said softly. Evelyn stood up, her chair scraping violently against the floor. She pointed a trembling, perfectly manicured finger at me. You planned this. You stole this from us. We will sue you until you have nothing left. Sue me with what, Evelyn? I asked, finally letting the decades of suppressed anger bleed into my voice. You don't have a cent to your name. The mansion? You double-mortgaged it to buy a villa in Cabo. Apex? It's bankrupt. You pushed me out of the will, remember? You had me sign a legally binding document severing me from the primary estate. I have absolutely no liability for your debts. Dad wouldn't have done this. Derek screamed, tears of pure terror welling in his eyes. He loved me. He wouldn't have left me with nothing. I stepped closer to the table, looking down at the brother who had mocked me my entire life. He didn't leave you with nothing, Derek. He left you with exactly what you built. A mountain of debt and an empty shell. He knew exactly what you were. He knew you would destroy everything he worked for. So he gave the engine to the only person who knew how to fix it. I looked at Evelyn. Her face was pale, the arrogant mask completely shattered, replaced by the horrifying realization of her new reality. The banks were going to take the house. The creditors were going to seize the cars. They were going to be left with nothing but the clothes on their backs. By the way, I added, turning toward the door, because Apex continued to use my proprietary software for 8 months without an active lease agreement. Sentinel Consulting is officially filing a lawsuit against Apex Manufacturing for intellectual property theft and unpaid royalties. My lawyers estimate you owe me roughly $12 million. I expect it will force you into immediate liquidation. Derek collapsed back into his chair, burying his face in his hands, letting out a pathetic, guttural sob. Evelyn just stared at the wall, her eyes wide, completely broken. I didn't stay to watch them cry. I didn't need to. The victory didn't feel like an explosion. It felt like a deep, cleansing breath of fresh air. I walked out of the boardroom, out of the building, and into the crisp Chicago morning. The sky was clear. The traffic hummed its steady rhythm. For 34 years, I had let them dictate my value. I had let them measure me with a broken ruler. But standing there on the pavement, holding the true legacy of my father's life, I finally understood the truth. You don't defeat toxic people by arguing with them. You defeat them by letting them walk blindly into the traps they built for themselves and locking the door behind them.